The first bill we have on the agenda today will be House File 2140, and I make the motion that House File 2140 be re-referred to the Committee on Elections, Finance, and Government Operations. Welcome to committee, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great to be here.
And I believe before you get started, you have a DE amendment. Would you like to start with that before we get into your bill?
I do. Would someone here move that for me, the DE one?
I will move the DE1 amendment to House File 2140. To the amendment, Representative Kraft.
Yeah, so this gets the bill in the form that I would like it, and I think maybe what we should do is go to testifiers, and then I can kind of summarize at the end, if that works.
Okay, so we'll approve the amendment here and then get to your testifiers?
I would like to do that, yes, please.
Any discussion of the DE1 amendment? All those in favor into adopting the DE1 amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The amendment is adopted. To House File 2140 as amended, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the More Homes, Right Places bill. And it really, I'm carrying this bill and feel so passionately about it, and other housing bills you're hearing really because of a number of things. One, it started my time on city council and learning how important housing and affordable housing issues is to my community. And then also through the process of door knocking. I can't tell you how many times I heard the comment, well, I've lived in this community for 30 years, for 40 years, but I couldn't afford my house today. Or my kids can't afford to live near here. Or I work in your community and I can't afford to live anywhere near here. You know, on top of that, many of you may know that I got involved with politics to do something about climate change. So I've realized that, we have this massive housing shortage in Minnesota and really across the country. And where we choose from here to put that housing is really important. If we allow it to sprawl and pave over more farmland, pave over more green space, it will also make our transportation emissions problem a lot worse. Now, even if that's not something that motivates you, let me talk about the other things that it makes worse. If we allow that to happen, we are placing a time tax on people, requiring more time of them to be in their car, in congestion, less time with their families, less time in community.
Recording in progress.
All right. And we're increasingly making that happen to the folks that are least able, least fortunate among us. So I'm really excited about this bill. This bill is really focused at the place in between single-family homes and small apartment buildings. And with that, maybe I'll turn it over to testifiers, and then at a later, after that, go more into the specifics of the bill.
Thank you, Representative Kraft. We'll get into testifiers. I do want to note today we have a lot of testifiers for this bill and the next bill, so we're going to try to keep them to 2 minutes a testifier, just so we can give everyone appropriate time to get through the bills we have on the agenda today. So first person we have up to testify will be Cecil Smith. And if he's not here yet, we'll move to Brian Baer. Welcome to committee. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you. My name is Brian Baer. I'm the city administrator for the city of Hugo. I'm testifying today on behalf of the League of Minnesota Cities and Metro Cities. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'd like to thank the author of this bill for listening to comments so far. However, we do still have some concerns. The bill as amended by the DE1 would create mixed housing districts on 50% of the land in our non-urban city, that is the city of Hugo, is zoned residential. But in Hugo, roughly 3/4 of our city is in the urban reserve, which makes meeting this requirement difficult, if not impossible. Our city is also prohibited from drilling new wells to access drinking water because of the White Bear Lake problem. Mandating extra high densities in area of the city where we haven't planned for it is extraordinarily problematic for us. Okay, let's talk about municipal state aid streets. Might not be what you think. In Hugo, they wind through neighborhoods and rural areas. They are in no way considered commercial corridors by anyone. We cannot find any logic to creating higher density along these corridors. Even if we thought we could add new density to our city, we would not locate the density along these corridors. State aid streets must be designed to meet state aid standards, and the state requires the streets in Hugo to be posted as no parking for safety reasons. Choosing these specific streets as corridors for new housing units where parking rules would be eliminated is additionally problematic. Further, the sewer pipes under our state aid streets are not designed with extra capacity for extra living units. Homeowners associations. These are proposed by developers as a way to be creative with development to build smaller units and higher densities. The HOA provides the maintenance of private streets and common spaces, and it's the city's responsibility to ensure a developer fulfills their promises and actually creates the HOA. A condition of approval is the way that this happens. We condition it. Preempting that condition may preempt HOAs altogether and eliminate a good development option. This bill interferes with a fundamental city authority, zoning and land use, which impacts the ability of cities to plan and respond to local conditions. It dismantles the comprehensive planning and zoning processes that we've worked to build our communities. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, for your time today. We look forward to continuing to work with you on these issues.
Thank you, Mr. Bear. Next on the list will be Scarlett Bennett. And I believe they are online. Go ahead and introduce yourself for the record, and welcome to committee.
Thank you. I am very happy to be here. My name is Scarlett Bennett, and I am the Director of Housing Development for Nebraska Community Action, which is located in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and also has an office in International Falls, Minnesota. And I am here today to testify in support of Housing File 2018. So Chair Igo and representatives, it is a pleasure to be here. The region to which I serve and advocate for today in support of this bill encompasses 13,000 square miles of our state. This includes nearly 30 cities and townships and 15 school districts. Itasca County and Couchiching County alone encompass 6,082 square miles, which is nearly half of that area. And taking this into consideration, that this means that there are nearly 30 city councils with 30 planning and zoning committees with different zoning districts and maps, setback and density requirements, different permitting processes and fees and approvals, and different definitions. Some of our cities and communities have future land use maps while others do not, and some have updated their zonings while others are in the need to help understand the impacts of their own zoning rules when it comes to entertaining a potential future development and how to attract a developer. It's not uncommon for a lot of our cities to not have had an update to their land use ordinance or zoning ordinance in over 30 years. A lot of us developers like myself who work in the affordable housing realm don't have time to do this, and they don't want to work in this type of environment. And cities and councils can flat out refuse to have conversations regarding development needs and regarding the changes in zoning and the needs for conditional use permits. In our region, as Representative Igo very well knows, a lot of our communities are landlocked, and when land is available, the barriers are often challenging. So zoning and permitting for the benefit of a city's residents and economic health and well-being should not be one of them. Neither should a lack of resources be a barrier to help cities gain deployment in which they need. So cities sometimes lack the resources, and we have communities that are, resisting change out of fear, misinformation, and common NIMBYism. So when we look at rural areas, we need to make housing make sense. And I believe that the Housing File 2018 is a great baseline, and it's a great start. And if we're really going to start tackling this problem, housing has to work for people and the people that are behind it and willing to make it happen, and not politics. Housing is not, it's a basic need, and it's a critical driver of a city's. I apologize, I'm working from home today with kids. Sorry, this is Minnesota. But I understand that we have a housing crisis that's very real in Minnesota, and it applies to constituents that are both Republican and Democrat. And with the big barriers that we face, like cost, capital, control, and compliance, zoning should be one that we don't have to worry about. And again, to reiterate, I testify in support because I feel that even though a lot of our cities have moved mountains to gain development, a lot of them will not. And I think that this bill will be a great step forward as a baseline, a guide point, and a reference to help cities build that capacity that they need to entertain future development. So thank you, and sorry for the interruption.
No worries. Thank you, Ms. Bennett. It looks like Cecil Smith is here if you want to take the stand. Welcome to committee, and please introduce yourself for the record.
No, this is 2140.
Mr. Chair, I think I'm here for the commercial, multifamily and commercial.
Oh, looks like our agenda might be a little haphazard here then, so I apologize.
Thank you.
Give us 1 second, make sure we got your right testifiers here, Representative Kraft.
Mr. Chair, if it'd be helpful, there's some other stuff I could go through that I was going to wait to the end. I could do that for a little bit.
If that's okay, why don't you go to that, Representative Kraft? I want to make sure you get your right testifiers here.
okay.
Apologies.
No, no problem. So, you know, there's no one thing that is going to magically resolve our affordable housing crisis, but it cannot be resolved without fixing housing supply. And I've seen a lot of data, and I think when you look at the data, it screams out at you that we have a supply problem. And so I want to go through a little bit of that just to level set. And there's a handout that I gave that starts with yes to homes. And I'm going to peel out a few slides there. So if you go to the slide 3, this shows that our affordable housing gap, that households that don't have access to affordable housing at the lower end of our affordability scale, 114,000 gap, okay? That's on that, the affordable side. If you go to slide 5, this is evaluating the decade from 2011 to 2020, the goals that we had in the 7-county metro area for affordable housing. And what you can see is, based on the goal, we hit 44% of that goal. So the message here is that our current approaches are not working. If you look to slide 6, I think this really is where you can see really clearly the housing gap. You can see us going along at fairly consistent 30 to 40,000 starts per year, and then it just dropping off a cliff after the 2008 Great Recession, and it just starting to get back up. That's where that gap is coming from. Slide 7 is another thing to show that the deficit isn't getting better, right? So this is from the US Census. It looks at the deficit we have in 2018 versus 2023, and you can see that deficit is growing up to about almost 100,000. Then I want to turn to slide 8. This one is pretty stark, and I think yours is not in color, but what it shows is, if you see in the 2008 to 2013 timeframe, you see that the chart that's kind of high and then drops off. That's the number of $200,000 and below homes on the market. And the one at the bottom, if you look down at the bottom, the dark line that is going up and now is the most number of homes we have on the market, that's 500K and above. So this chart just shows you the impact of that housing supply problem on the prices that have to be paid on housing. And then a little bit more on that, if you look at slide 9, you look at the percent growth in home prices versus median household income just from 2016 to 2023. If we back this up even more, it would be worse, going from 30% increase in household income. The median home price has increased 71%. Slide 10, I call this the glimmer of hope. All right, this is stuff that has been done by Minneapolis. They enacted policies to increase housing supply. And here is where you can see that their change in housing units overall in Minnesota and Minneapolis was much higher. They're the bar on the left. The change in average rent is much lower, 1% versus 14% across Minnesota. And, by the way, the change in homelessness dropped down. These policies we're talking about, are the data is screaming at us to do them and can be successful. So that's the level set that I want to do. And then if we're ready for testifiers, I can then after go into the specifics of the bill.
Yes, it looks like we got it figured out. We had one or two get switched around when it printed, so then it flip-flopped everything, but I think I got the order back in front of us. So next on the list then would be Rick Varco. Welcome to committee. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Chair Igo and members of the committee, my name is Rick Varco. I am the political director of SEIU Healthcare Minnesota and Iowa. Our union represents over 50,000 healthcare workers in hospitals, clinics, nursing homes, and self-directed home care. What good is a union pay raise if your landlord just jacks up the rent? Too many of our members pay too much for housing. The main culprit is local municipal governments who won't let them pay someone to build the housing they can afford. We are short 100,000 homes. The scarcity drives up prices most for service workers like our members. When cities limit housing, the people don't disappear. Last year, testifying on a similar bill, an SEIU member described how she spent a year and a half living mostly in her Jeep with 5 kids. She would park overnight in various locations, then her kids would try to go to school, and she would go to work. This bill would make it legal to build more housing that service workers can afford. In most cities, most of the land is currently reserved only for single-family homes. Only a fraction of the land is available for triplexes and other more affordable types of housing. Lots of people like big houses and a big yard. But when you are struggling, you want a roof and some walls. It should be legal to build more places like that. Current law gives exclusive control over how much new housing will be built to local residents. Political decisions should give voice to all those affected. New housing anywhere lowers costs for the entire region, but current residents who benefit most from excluding new residents are given sole control. You can't expect this system to ever produce anything other than the most minimal increase in housing supply. This bill simply allows the rest of us, through the state, which is our democratic voice, to speak up in favor of a few minimal steps to build the housing we need. This is a pro-worker issue. That is why the Minnesota AFL-CIO passed a convention resolution in support of relaxing local restrictions on housing supply. Finally, whether you think Minnesota needs lower taxes or better public services, the budget reality this session is that you won't be able to do much of either. But this bill does not cost anything. At no cost, you can lower the #1 expense for almost every family, and the impact will only grow over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Varco. Next on the list will be Charles Gardner, who I believe is online. Please introduce yourself for the record and continue through testimony.
Hi, Chair Igo and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to offer informational testimony on HF2140. I am Charles Gardner. I'm a research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. I study housing policy and affordability across the country. And as part of my research, I've recommended reforms to local land use regulations similar to those that are proposed in this bill as crucial to reducing housing costs. So as you know, cities and towns across Minnesota have many rules that limit the quantity and type of homes that can be built. This includes minimum lot size regulations, height limits, and single-family zoning. In part due to how these rules restrict the creation of new housing supply, many Minnesota residents are suffering from rising housing costs. Since the beginning of 2020, it's estimated that home prices have risen over 25% statewide, and the typical mortgage payment on the median-priced home has risen from about $1,600 a month to $2,750 a month in 2024. So restoring property owners' flexibility to build housing in different configurations and at higher densities is an essential step toward bringing rents and prices under control. Its importance is increasingly being recognized at the state level, and this is nationwide. In our work, we've cataloged how many other states have already enacted very similar reforms to the one that's being proposed here, including Arizona, Maryland, Montana, Vermont, and Washington. All those states have already enacted bills legalizing between 2 and 4 units on single-family lots in various areas, and many other states are considering them. We've included written testimony with links to our work where you can find these bills and read more about them if you're curious. Allowing more and denser housing to be built where currently only single-family homes are permitted is a market-driven approach to improving affordability. So this bill would help reduce the cost of newly constructed homes by allowing home builders essentially to at least triple the density on many lots, adding to supply. It also provides for a streamlined administrative approval process for housing. Streamlining procedure is another important area that is ripe for state reform. Just a comment on the balancing of interests. The benefits of new housing are dispersed. When new housing is built, it benefits the people who live in it, but also frees up some less expensive housing in other areas that residents of the new building are leaving behind. And this improves housing affordability overall, in the market overall. But despite these collective benefits, many residents resist the prospect of nearby housing construction and neighborhood change. State-level action can help reconcile these interests in a way that respects the rights and interests of all state residents. So ideas like those proposed in this bill would achieve this by setting reasonable limits on the local use of the zoning power and would allow the housing market to better respond to rising demand, which would improve affordability without requiring any government subsidies. The bill would also put Minnesota in the company of a growing list of states, which I mentioned, that have enacted legislation allowing more units per lot. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Next on the list will be Peter Wagenius. Welcome, committee. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Peter Wagenius, Legislative Director of Sierra Club North Star Chapter. Excited to be able to testify on the same side as Mercatus. Minnesotans want homes near their jobs, transit, and amenities like grocery stores and parks. But current policies force maximal development to the fringe of the metro area, requiring people to drive the longest possible distances and destroying more forests, wetlands, farmland, and open space. Legalizing a variety of housing types in walkable communities would help us address housing affordability, preserve farmland, and protect our environment. Maximal sprawl, as noted, is not a product of the free market. Local city policies have made efficient and economic use of land illegal. In MnDOT's review of policies to reduce the growth of vehicle miles traveled, they ranked land use and parking policies as more impactful than every other option combined. This is a statewide problem, and the state must act to address this. It's just crazy to think 182 elected boards for 182 different cities and townships in the metro area could ever address this, let alone the number statewide. Cities currently have the power to block housing, and they've been using it year after year, decade after decade, but only because the state allows them to. I worked in city government for 16 years. Our city attorney set me straight on this question right away. He said, Peter, cities have no power under the U.S. Constitution, none. Cities only have the powers delegated to us by the state legislature. That's it. So the legislature could continue to let cities fail on housing, but the state could also say, we're done waiting for you. It's time to set minimum standards. If we let the cities keep failing at this point, we are complicit in their failure. The math is clear. Why are we so far behind in production of new housing units? There has been a simultaneous increase in population for the last 6 decades and a simultaneous decrease in the number of people per household. We have smaller families now. To have kept up, we would have needed to allow more housing units to accommodate both. It's not partisan. It's just math. Cities have reacted to the math by blocking housing. It's so bad that there are 11 cities in the metro area that have fewer people today than their previous peak populations in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. The state must not ignore the math. It's time for action, and these two bills you're hearing today are a great place to start, and we're honored to support them as a part of the entire bipartisan land use reform package. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wagenius. Next on the list will be Linnea Gotterstad. Welcome to committee. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Hi, my name is Linnea Gotterstad. I am a resident of District 59B and a volunteer for Neighbors for More Neighbors. I'm here today to testify in support of HF2140. I moved to Northeast Minneapolis in 2014 and from the start loved my community there. My then fiance and I rented a one-bedroom apartment in a fourplex that couldn't be built in most Minnesota neighborhoods today. We loved our neighborhood and we wanted to stay. And we were able to afford a 3-bedroom attached townhome that also couldn't be built in most Minnesota neighborhoods, 3 blocks from our apartment, where we now live with our 7-month-old and 3-year-old. Attached homes like ours, along with triplexes and fourplexes that HF2140 legalizes, are more accessible than single-family homes. The existence of a variety of types of homes, including our townhome complex and other similar buildings in our neighborhood, allow families to stay in the neighborhoods we want to live in. My mother and in-laws are of retirement age and they need a single-story living and a home where they are not required to shovel or mow. And over the past decade, they moved into single-story condo units within a couple miles of our townhome. Again, the type of homes they live in also could not be built in most Minnesota neighborhoods today. But because of the different types of homes that were allowed in my neighborhood, my children are growing up seeing their grandparents once a week. And my whole family has the enormous additional support of having extended family nearby. Allowing different styles of homes allows our multi-generational extended family to live near each other, and that's not the only thing that it does. Homes in my neighborhood and across the state are not affordable, and they are getting more and more expensive because there are not enough of them. This includes rent and mortgage prices. This bill will allow more homes in the neighborhoods we already have in our state, which will help take the pressure off the cost of housing across the board. It will also allow the new homes that are built to be more affordable because they'll be able to share more infrastructure costs the way my home does. This bill will also allow different styles of homes in our Minnesota neighborhoods, which I can attest to from my family's experience is a huge benefit for all of us. And for these reasons, I'm asking you to support HF2140. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Gotterstad. Next on the list will be Greg Kruschke. I hope I got that right. Welcome to committee. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you. My name is Greg Kruschke. I'm here on behalf of the City of Owatonna and the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. In my role, I am the Community Development Manager for the City of Owatonna. One of our big accomplishments was last year, the City of Owatonna adopted their first ever comprehensive plan. And in going through that in a thorough public engagement process, we came up with ways to find ways to add density and walkable neighborhoods within our city that is, was incorporated in 1862. So moving through that, we developed a number of nodes throughout our city of where these density areas could sprawl out from and be able to develop that going forward. With the proposed bill here, that addresses these in corridor styles and density areas with the vast number of acres in Owatonna that we have, to get to a 50% level just doesn't work for us. But we can do this in other existing areas that we've developed in our comprehensive plan to be able to address some of the density and how we can continue to grow our city. We are in desperate need of housing in Owatonna. However, we cannot get developers to look at Owatonna. To come down there, whether they're building in Lakeville, whether they're building in Rochester, they're all close enough areas, but that house costs the same amount to build in Lakeville as it does in Rochester or in Owatonna. And the lumber's all the same cost, the labor's the same cost, everybody's working everywhere. So to be able to attract people to come down and sell that house in Owatonna, it becomes an extremely difficult proposition. It's something we've struggled with for a number of years. I actually spent my morning this morning up at a real estate journal event trying to attract builders and developers to Owatonna to come and build housing to match our comprehensive plan that we have in place here that we recently adopted. So we do have some concerns with this bill. We don't want to throw out our comprehensive plan. This costs us $150,000. We've got a lot of pride in this, a lot of community effort and engagement in adopting this, and we don't want to have to go another direction to continue to try and to get our housing that we need for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kruschke. Next will be Cap O'Rourke. Welcome to committee, and please introduce yourself for the record.
Mr. Chair, members, my name is Cap O'Rourke. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Association of Small Cities. So I was presented with a fun little trivia fact yesterday in reading the DE1. How many cities under 5,000 are located within 1 mile of one of the cities that have a population of over 150,000? The answer is 6. We have 6 small cities that would be considered and labeled urban municipalities within the Twin Cities. The average population of these small cities is 900. So our concerns are with how our small cities within this definition are going to meet the requirements of this. I don't think this is, I'm not sure if this was the intended outcome of this amendment, but we have cities such as Hilltop and Landfall, Sunfish Lake, Lauderdale, Lilydale, that simply do not have some of the resources needed to have this higher density housing, even if they would want it. 2 of these communities are essentially mobile home communities. So one of our concerns is that in crafting a targeted legislation to get more density, no pun intended, that it may have inadvertently caught up some of our smallest cities, and they are going to have a difficult time meeting these standards and adjusting. Even if they had wanted to add more density, some of these communities simply don't have the resources to do so. So as this bill continues and moves forward, we would look to try to find a way to help these cities and not impact them inadvertently.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. That concludes everyone I have signed up to testify, but is there anyone from the public that wishes to testify? If so, please make your way to the front and then introduce yourself for the record.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and other committee members. I am Ron Williams for Robbinsdale and urge you all to vote for the passage of these 2 bills, HF2140 and 2018. In Minnesota, we look out for each other. We want a home for ourselves and our families, but everyone deserves a reasonable housing. Reasonable means that it meets the needs of a person and the person's family. That means that it's affordable for them. It provides a home for them which they could go to work and is accessible to groceries and other stores. However, exclusionary zoning laws have helped to lead to a shortage of at least 100,000 homes in our state. House File 2140 would help turn the situation around by requiring the creation of mixed-use housing zones. This will reinforce state investment in communities by allowing more homes, up to 4, near streets built with state infrastructure spending. This would encourage not only more abundant housing in this state, but cheaper and thus more affordable rental and owner housing in Minnesota. HF 2018 will allow multifamily homes to be built in commercial areas to help build busy, bustling neighborhoods with coffee shops, restaurants, and corner stores. But of the mixed uses this creates, more people will be able to live closer to work and the grocery store. These bills stand up for the secure, abundant homes for all Minnesotans. We envision a future where we all find homes and we love in neighborhoods we choose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Anyone else from the public that wishes to testify? So I know we had one question for one of the testifiers. We want to do that quick, and then Representative Kraft will go back to you. So I think the one question was from Representative Johnson.
Actually, I do have a question from the testifier, but I also have questions general for when we get to the House members. But one of the questions was for the gentleman that was here with the Sierra Club. You had stated that cities, you have, I don't know how many cities you listed that were decreasing in population. Could you list what those cities are or what counties those are in?
Yep, Mr. Rogenius, yeah, please, thank you.
The cities in question that are underneath their peak populations are the city of Minneapolis, the city of St. Paul, and 9 other cities directly adjacent to them. And if you give me a moment, I can share them with you. I would note that there are many other cities in the metro area just barely above their peak populations. The cities that are below include Minneapolis, St. Paul, Richfield, Golden Valley, Columbia Heights, Fridley, Brooklyn Center, New Hope, Crystal, Robbinsdale, Golden Valley. I think I may have listed one, and South St. Paul.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. That's what I wanted to hear, and because I've seen those reports too, and where they're escaping to is what we're trying to change to make them those cities. So thank you.
Next on the list will be Lead Howard.
Yes. Thank you. I had a question for Mr. Kruschke from Owatonna, if he's still here.
Mr. Kruschke, if you could come to the front, please.
Mr. Kruschke, thank you for testifying, and thank you for your work in Owatonna to build the comprehensive plan that you mentioned. And you talked about how in your comprehensive plan you did identify nodes for additional density where you thought that made the most sense for your community. And that, you know, as I understand this bill, that is sort of the direction. We want to make it so that cities have the choice about where, and we have this 50% figure, and you said that didn't work. I'm just curious, in terms of your city, and don't need an exact number, but do you have a sense of what percent of your area is zoned for single family in your comprehensive plan you're looking for additional density?
Mr. Kruschke.
Yeah, I would say it's tough because if you look at a certain number of acreage, you know, we have parks that are zoned single-family residential. We have a municipal golf course that's zoned single-family residential. So it depends on how you really look at that number to be able to come up with an acreage 50%. But, you know, at the end of the day, we wouldn't be approaching 50% just because of the vast number of acreage that is there. We'd be talking, I mean, the city of Owatonna as a whole is 16 square miles. It's probably somewhere between, I would say, 6 to 8 square miles. You know, not in acres, but rough numbers as we go. But it's, you know, a lot of the eastern portion, and obviously there's higher density areas along, you know, the more commercial corridors and the more commercial areas that we have. So just taking a rough number off of that. But, you know, when we look at the proposal with the state aids, you know, the state aid streets and how that, you know, how that number of streets come in, and, you know, obviously I've got a graphic here that nobody can see, but, you know, those streets don't necessarily align with where we would want the density to go, you know, and so to be able to build that into a node area instead of a linear corridor, and to be able to build that into a node makes a lot more sense, as you can have a center point and you can build the infrastructure out from that point and be able to service that area instead of a long strip that might not work. You might need lift stations, you know, pedestrian corridors, other things, you know, make that much more difficult. So with how we've done this, you know, we obviously a lot of public engagement to be able to get to this point, and that's really where the node concept came from.
Lead Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Kruschke. That's really helpful, and I think that the comments help us as we seek to craft this bill. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. And I believe Representative Scraba then had a question as well for it. Nope. Okay. Guess he didn't. All right. So then, Representative Kraft, we'll go back to you for comments before we go to member questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted just to hear the comments and walk through the bill a little bit and point to some spaces within the bill that address some of the things that were raised. But I think it's really important to recognize that this bill was the product of a lot of interaction, a lot of talking with advocates, with city groups. One of the biggest pieces of feedback that we did hear was to have more flexibility. To go towards more performance-based approach, and that's what's within here. We can talk about things at the margins and things like that, but that's where this is going. So to walk through it, subdivision 1 is about definitions. Subdivision 2 is where you first start seeing city choice. So conceptually here, cities select a portion of their residentially zoned districts to legalize more housing types. We do provide some guidance that we would like to see these selections done by considering proximity to transit, to commercial areas, to public amenities, to put density in the right places. Then we break it up by different types of cities. So for cities of the first class, there's a couple of options. One is that 75% of their, at least 75% of their districts zone residential should support up to quadplexes. They have another option, though, that if they want to go a different approach, they could go to an average density of 1 unit per 1,500 square feet. And we do ask for density along main thoroughfares. We're using MSA streets. And what you'll notice is this is a relatively new concept. In the bill right now, we haven't put in the number, the density per acre we're looking for, because this is a new concept that we've brought over the past week or so, and so we want to interact more with cities here. But conceptually here is pick where in those corridors you want to put more density, and there'll be a higher requirement for larger cities. Then when you go to the adjacent to Minneapolis, to cities over 150,000 in population, the requirement changes, still 75% of residentially zoned districts that need to support up to triplexes. The other option is still there to do an average density of 1 unit per 1,500 square feet, and is still asking for density along those main thoroughfares. For non-urban cities, which is other cities in any other city in the 7-county metro, and cities with a population of 10,000 or more outside of the metro, would ask for 50% of their districts, residentially zoned districts, to support up to triplexes. The other option is to do it more wherever you want, an average density of 1 unit per 4,000 square feet. A note, cities outside of the 7-county metro area, less than 10K in population, are exempt. Also, to make sure to understand is that nothing in the above section mandates any amount of new housing to be built. It simply ensures that it is an allowable use alongside existing uses. Also, within this subdivision is a key point, and this is something that I think would address most, if not all, of the issues raised by the testifier from Hugo. Additional housing cannot be forced on an area where the infrastructure cannot support it. For example, this bill would not apply for areas that have well and septic. Additional restrictions that are built into this is additional housing cannot be forced on an area that would impact floodplains, areas of critical or historical concern, wild and scenic rivers, et cetera, et cetera. So we tried to have the let's not put housing in dumb places, what I would say, okay? Moving to subdivision 3, I want to point out here bulk standards. So this is an area where last year there was a lot of concern of getting into specific size of setbacks and the like. What we've gone to here is to say, look, if you're going to legalize triplexes, you can't come in some other way and put some other controls on them that make them impossible to build. So what we're saying is here, look, you can do whatever bulk controls you want, but at the end of the day, there has to be 1,500, you have to be able to allow 1,500 square feet per residential unit. So duplex would mean your combination of controls need to allow for a 3,000 square foot building. Triplex, it needs to allow for a 4,500 square foot building. So flexibility, but you can't prevent what we're asking for in another way. Their subdivision 3 has, this is where we have the aesthetic mandate language, the parking language, and HOA language, and that right now has mirrored the standalone bills. And so we know that there, as discussions happen there, I would imagine we'd reflect those in this bill. Moving to subdivision 4, this is a key area where we talk about approvals. One of the biggest issues you hear that drive up costs from developers is unpredictability. That you start a process and you never know how long it's going to end, how long it's going to take. And so what we're saying is here is for up to quadplexes, we should be able to approve them in the same way that you approve a single family home. Use your existing process, don't create a new process, but we should be able to approve it in the same way. I think that's pretty reasonable. For things larger than that, they need to use an existing well-defined process, something referred to as 1599, which if you ask me details on that, I will need to pull up someone else to answer that, but it's a well-understood process. And then subdivision 5 is about, you can't, have any funny business to modify this somewhere else to make it moot. And subdivision 6, or what happens if you don't do this, what is the result? Lastly, the last bit is we've put forth a staggered approach to implementation so that larger cities implement first, followed by medium size, and then smaller cities later. And that's if there's resources being used to help folks implement this stuff, that not everyone is going to them at once. So that is the bill. And I appreciated the comment from Mr. O'Rourke. And, we don't want a patchwork of stuff happening, patchwork of different kind of things, but you raised some good points, and we're happy to talk further about it.
Thank you, Representative Kraft. Now we'll move into member questions. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Igo. Thank you, Representative. I do have a number of questions that came up. One of them, I'm going to start off right off, is that subdivision 5, which was brought up to authors after a meeting yesterday, after a question that I asked, which said, would this prevent cities from requiring dedications of parks? Which is required right now in Cottage Grove for any new development going in. The effort is to keep communities together, to get the kids out of the houses and playing, and keep green spaces. I see that subdivision, and when the DE was done and rewritten, that subdivision is still in there preventing dedication of parks. I was told that the law was not intended, or the bill was not intended to do that, but I still see that word still being utilized. So my question again here, does that eliminate cities from requiring developers and new communities, the cities requiring parks or money in lieu of a park to be able to put a park somewhere else?
Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I wasn't here yesterday, and so maybe I'll ask for if there was some discussion yesterday it seems like it's building on things from yesterday, so I'd rather hear about that before responding.
Lead Howard.
Thank you, Chair Igo. Representative Johnson, we had a conversation about this afterwards and had some subsequent conversations. The intent here is to make sure that we're not creating backdoor ways for cities to create additional new ways to create additional fees, not to supersede what is currently the state of play. We had a conversation offline with League of Minnesota Cities about seeing if we should look at a language tweak, but that is the intent of the legislation.
If I could add to taking some chair privilege, the last sentence really kind of gets into, quote, more restrictive than those in section or other municipal law or rule. So there's discussions being had, but that last sentence is kind of the sentence that cleans up the concern as understood by authors who are carrying multiple parts of this in their bills. So Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I would just, and maybe I can do this in future amendments, just take that word out, and then it removes any possibility, because that's what it's called when you're at the city level, because I've been on Planning Commission and on City Council. It's a dedication. It's a park dedication that is required when you put in a community, when you put in these developments. And otherwise, you just end up creating, you take away all the green spaces and you just create inner city areas, and that's not what we want to do. So if that would be my suggestion in the future. The other question, sorry, Chair, I have questions. There was a comment made that there was no cost to this, which I have a little bit confused, because we had the city of Owatonna, I believe, up here said they just spent $150,000 in their comp plan. And my understanding is that this would require every city to create a new comp plan, which then would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do. So my question is, why isn't there a fiscal note in here or acknowledgement of that, or is there going to be some compensation to these cities in the tune of millions of dollars to compensate that it's not a mandate, unfunded mandate put down on our cities now?
Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Johnson. So I will maybe comment a little bit on what the testifier said. I think he was talking about relative to our general fund. Look, there's no free lunch on stuff, right? Things require work. This does not require a new comprehensive plan, so that is false. And as cities right now are going through the process of updating their comprehensive plans and update their zoning codes, fairly regularly, yes, this asks them to build that into their update process, and we give them time to do it.
Representative Johnson.
I would, Mr. Chair, sorry. I would turn to cities on that because a lot of the cities have just finished their comp plans, and it's a 2030 plan, 2040 plan, 2050 plan, and that's usually a 10-year plan. And if you're changing the density in a community, you have to update that and get that approval from the Met Council. So I would just say that there would be a lot of cost and time associated with that. But question I have, another plan I have is, what about, I know you talked about it would not be required or did not limit or would not people have infrastructure issues or challenges. What about our communities that are dealing with PFAS and the thought and being restricted from the DNR from putting in wells, and the places that can put it in require treatment centers? I'm talking about Lake Elmo as an example, being told they have to put in a bunch of multi-family when their system and their city can't handle it, just because the DNR has shut them down as far as being able to build wells in the homes that they are building. There's challenge right now. So would there be a thing that if cities are challenged with PFAS and limitation in water, would they be excluded at this time?
Representative Kraft.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative Johnson. So I'm not familiar, I'm obviously familiar with the horrific PFAS situation we have, but are these places, are they not allowing single-family homes today?
Representative Johnson.
Yes, they are allowing single-family homes, but I agree, townhome development, sorry, Mr. Chair, if I forgot it, townhome development, multifamily homes add a lot more demand on water than a single-family home. So I think you could build a number of single-family homes compared to how many multifamily homes in a community that will be. An example, Mr. Chair, bring in Lake Elmo as example. They have a mobile home park that has PFAS in the well. They are not allowed to hook up to the city water of Lake Elmo because of the water restrictions that have been put on them because they can't drill the wells. So that is their situation. So then to turn around and say they have to put in hundreds of more of these prop homes when they can't even take care of the communities that are actually there already would be a concern. And I'm just wondering if that would be something that they could exempt from.
So Representative Kraft, and I'll just add too, again, this bill in front of us isn't mandating the homes be built. Yet, if a developer wants to come and build those homes and work with the DNR to make those homes happen, that's what this bill would be doing. Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representatives, I'll also point you to lines, especially 330 to 332, which is language that we've actually worked on with the cities that talks about issues, and especially the last two, including the adequacy of existing public infrastructure imposed by a municipality to promote public health, safety, and general welfare. So I'm not an expert on this specific situation, but if adding housing is against the public health and general welfare, then this would allow to not be allowed. And I would say, if they can build 3 single-family homes, they can build a triplex. Thanks.
And Representative Johnson, I know we have to get a few more done, and out of respect for our next bill up by a fellow committee member, I think we're going to move on unless you have another short question, but very short.
No, I was just going to say thank you, Chair.
All right, other members for discussion. Lead Howard.
I'll be brief. Thank you, Representative Kraft, for all of your work on this bill and the body of our work to build more homes. I really appreciate the approach we're moving in this bill towards that performance standard method, where we're sort of saying, cities, you know your cities well. We are having an expectation with a statewide housing shortage that we need to be building more homes in the right places, but we're going to let you all do the work to make sure it's going where it makes the most sense. And to me, that's, again, an approach that we're listening through this process and adapting the bill, and I think ultimately gets us to a better final product. You know, and just to reiterate what we heard from some of the other testimonies, these concepts are not brand new. They're working all across the country to build more homes, and that's having the impact of improving affordability and opening up all kinds of home opportunities, not just for those new homes, but the people that are moving in right behind if somebody's moving out of an existing home. And so this is exactly the direction we need to go, and I appreciate all your work on the bill.
And I'll just make a few closing comments as well. Thank you, Representative Kraft, for all the work you've done on this. I mean, being in a lot of these meetings with you over the last couple of months, and the compromise, I mean, even getting the DE in front of us today shows the collaboration that has occurred on this piece of legislation. And like my colleague Lead Howard said, this is something that is working nationwide, and we're seeing red and blue states enacting this. I'm pretty sure I just saw our vice president talking about how we need to do more stuff like this the other day. So it goes to show that this isn't a red or a blue issue, but an issue that's going to lift up all Minnesotans. With that, Representative Kraft, any closing comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. The other thing that data shows is that no individual city can solve this on their own. They can do great things, and if we don't do this statewide, they will fail. And so I'm really excited about where we've come to on this bill. I look forward to tweaking as necessary, but I'm excited for what comes next, and hopefully this is a foundation to partner with cities and creative approaches and really doing the stuff that we all know is necessary. So thank you all, and I urge your support.
With that, I re-renew my motion that House File 2140 be as amended be referred to the Elections and Finance and Government Operations Committee. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? The motion prevails and the bill is on its way. Thank you, Representative Kraft.